Dave Brown, who works with Derbyshire County Council and who is going to give us a talk on international waste management in 2015 and beyond, crisis and opportunity. That's quite a mouthful.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Susan and Alex, for inviting me here to talk about this, which is, I've been involved in waste management for about 20 years, very much at the coal face, and through a mixture of professional incompetence and good luck, I'm still very much at the coal face, so I'm trying to stay on that level. And over the 20 years that I've actually been working in this field, lots of experiences. I started off with the Environment Agency, and that involved a lot of work looking on the enforcement side of waste regulation. That was up in Lancashire, and that allowed me to have some wonderful experiences, actually seeing the end result of how we live our lives in this country and around the world increasingly, and actually getting to grips with the scale of waste management issues and the scale of waste disposal. So as part of that job, I inspected waste management facilities to try and encourage them to be run in the proper way and to encourage compliance with the Environmental Protection Act. And that meant that I was inspecting landfill sites as well, and seeing the vast scale of waste disposal. So I would go to sites such as, the Winnie Hill site up near Accrington, and I would walk across it and check that cover was being applied and that waste wasn't escaping the site. And it was, just to give you a scale, I could walk at about this speed for 45 minutes and I'd still be on the landfill site, and I'd still be looking down potentially, literally a mountain of rubbish. So you get like a cliff at the edge of the cell that's being developed. And this gave me some wonderful experiences, such as one of my first ones was falling into a sewage sludge trench, and that was good fun. So back in those days, the early 90s, the idea of health and safety hadn't really dawned on landfill managers, and we had I was making my way on a late November day. It was just about going dark, probably just me and the driver left on site, and I was carrying my gas machine because we used to measure landfill gas at the side of the site. And I came across an area which I basically just didn't notice, but apparently there were a few highly visible, highly warning tyres around this trench. I thought it was a great way to warn me of a trench to have some dirty tyres on a dirty floor. And so, of course, I carried straight on into this thing. Thankfully, though, I wouldn't be here today, I always say, if I hadn't fallen backwards. I sort of fell backwards, so I was able to lean back onto the soft ground, because underneath me was about 30 feet of sewage sludge. And the driver on the site managed to come and pick me out underneath the armpits and drag me out. And but the stench was quite remarkable, actually, even by my standards, pretty bad anyway. And I then drove back to Preston from Accrington, 20 odd miles, late sort of start of winter, but the windows fully down, and I had to take my clothes off before I got in the house, and then leg it into the house, and get clean, and then try and get these highly hazardous clothes into the dustbin. And I think I did have a few clothes at home to go out shopping as well, so I could renew that. But that was one opportunity. Then also got to meet people like scrapyard operators. Some of my favourite characters, in a bizarre sort of way, were in East Lancashire, the scrapmen there, who you never quite knew what they were thinking. They were often actually very, very intelligent, switched on, ran rings around me most of the time, actually. And I made the foolish mistake, unlike most Environment Agency officers, I made the foolish mistake of actually trying to implement the law and actually trying to drive change. which didn't go down too well. But there was one character, there's a legend in my mind still. He was called Dirty Billy, and there were just so many different reasons he could have been called Dirty Billy. It's really an extraordinary character. This sort of chap you see with a couple of £100 in his hand, and actually, sort of ironically and perfectly, the last time I ever saw him was in court. We prosecuted him, but he ran a scrapyard with vehicles piled sort of 15 to 20 cars high. They still probably exist like this back in the late 90s, and I always wondered and dreaded to myself what would happen if one of these things caught fire. And one day it did, and it was basically like a small atom bomb that had gone off in East Lancashire. The smoke, I remember this, I'd come off our one inspection and I looked east and there's this vast black cloud rising into the sky, miles into the sky, and I was thinking, please God, don't let that be one of my sites. But it was. And then, so this site was east of Blackburn, and 25 miles west of Blackpool, they could see the smoke. And the M65 had to be closed, and it was quite radical. And then more lately, there were also landfill site owners who were very interesting characters. The full spectrum of people back in the late 90s were running major landfill sites, and there was one chap who was charming, but he was also a cowboy, and he was insisting to me that he had this wonderful sort of bioreactor going on in this landfill site, and that it was imperative to not cover the waste because you needed to let the water in so that it could break down, break down quickly, and could get rid of the waste really quickly by basically not doing all the things that the Environment Agency wanted it to do. And then more recently, I've moved over to looking at engaging with the public and trying to influence and encourage people to change their habits and to make changes. This is, unlike the previous talk, the issues are simple, so there's not the level of complexity, which might be better that I'm on second now. So there's not the level of complexity, but there is the level of impact globally. So it's been a great experience to talk to so many people across Derbyshire, trying to get to grips with why they recycle, why they don't recycle, what they think, and try to control the conversations, which often start on the right foot of, do you recycle your plastic? What sort of plastics do you recycle? But then so often quickly get moved on to like papal conspiracies and things like that. I'm either trying to keep a straight face or yes. So tonight I'm talking about international waste management and just trying to give an overview, tell a story about what's happening out there in the world. We've got some really good news happening in the UK and England about changes that have been made, and amazingly, if we all did some very simple actions, we'd make a drastic difference. The problem is that so many people aren't making those changes, and that's something we're continually grappling with. To try and help people make that change, and crucially to try and thank them for the efforts that they've made already, because there's a lot of people out there who are completely dispirited about the situation. They think it's pointless and they don't realise that their efforts actually are making a big contribution. So just introducing the waste crisis. This is Lebanon. Some notes. So this was Lebanon 2009, and this is in the city of Sidon. I think it's a landfill called the Said, a landfill on the edge of the Mediterranean. And across Lebanon, there's about 700 illegal and unsafe waste dumps. There's only 10% of waste recycled in Lebanon as of sort of 2012, with 40% of the waste going into dumps. Well, in this talk, what we're talking about in terms of dumps is the totally uncontrolled dumping of material into big mounds, basically. So in England, in the UK, and you talk about landfill sites, they increasingly have become highly engineered, highly sophisticated places with, you'll have a permit governing how they operate. It'll be about that thick. And you might have 50, 60 different conditions that they have to comply with. In much of the world, nothing of the sort. There's literally just, as you might imagine, dumping into the environment, totally uncontrolled. And that's some of the picture in Lebanon. So this Saida dump started in 1982 after the war with Israel, and it was initially used as an area for dumping the rubbish of buildings that had been destroyed in the Israel war. In the war with Israel, and once it became established, it was then easy for householders, businesses, commerce to add their own domestic different streams of waste to it. And it grew and grew to a spectacular and disastrous size. And there were reports that at one point you had 150 ton avalanches of waste falling into the sea. Not surprisingly, it was thought that swimming in the area, if you were crazy enough to do that, or it could lead to hospitalisation. Some people maybe didn't have a choice and had to work in and around that environment. It was estimated that Lebanon was losing sort of $500 million annually to the pollution, ill health, and agricultural losses associated with that. But now, I have looked into it, and apparently there has been an improvement there just in the last 2 or 3 years. And actually, there was a few sort of case studies that I picked out, and it was quite pleasing to see that literally just in the last 2 or 3 years, perhaps because of the scale of the crisis they were facing, action's been taken. Sometimes quite chaotic action, but better than what was before. And here, what they did was they actually developed a seawall. The government decided to close the site off to do any further waste deliveries, and then they transported a lot of the material to a processing facility. Now, the sceptics say that a lot of it just went into other landfills, but at least it wasn't into the sea. And there was an accusation that when they built the seawall, the breakwater, actually they used some of that material to do that with. So in that case, it would still be going to the depths of the ocean. Some of this material had been turning up in Cyprus, but I don't know how you'd know that, because material washing up in Cyprus could have come from Italy, could have come anywhere around the Mediterranean basin. So that's one example, and they've actually got plans to make it into a green park. So basically remove a vast amount of this material and replace it with a parkland area. How on earth they do that? You're always going to have some of the waste underbedding that material, I think, but that at least is positive. But it's not just in developing and poor countries that they have this problem, not at all. This is Italy. The area around Naples, you may know, has had tremendous problems with poor waste management. Frequently, we've had crises. Basically, 2 or 3 years ago, there was a crisis when the government, basically the landfill space ran out completely. They couldn't find another outlet for it, and it just built up on the streets and was burnt on the streets and in the countryside. That crisis seems to ebb and flow, come and go. I think we're on top of it more recently, but only by shipping materials up to Holland. And all through that, you've had a much more sort of dangerous criminal operation or mafia and operation of fly tipping in the Camorra region with dumping of hazardous, toxic, domestic industrial materials, potentially linked to things like cancer, allergies, birth defects. So vast amounts of illegal and hazardous waste. Which have been periodically set alight. And the locals have a great concern that some of the farming locals have concern that the material rainwater will go into aquifers and then be taken up by agricultural crops and then end up back in the food chain. So 10 million tonnes of waste material was dumped in that zone between 1991 and 2013. Just to give you an idea, 10 million tonnes is about a third of the total household waste production in the UK each year. So in such a small area, that's a heck of a lot of fly-tipped material. But of course, massively lucrative, isn't it? As the cost of disposing of waste properly goes up, it becomes massively lucrative for criminal gangs to sort things out and for businesses to avoid proper waste management legislation and to take it on. Unfortunately, it's the locals that pay the price. And there'll be all sorts of other costs like that. It's not going to be looking great on the tourist cards and brochures. Oh, yeah.
I don't want to get in the way of your slides.
It's all right. Talk a bit louder anyway.
Push it to that side.
Thanks. So another example is Bangalore, where again, until last night actually, I didn't realise that there was good news in Bangalore as well. Where they've got to, there seems to be a pattern. You get to, it's human nature though, that's the thing. You get to a point of absolute crisis, like when I was preparing this talk, and then you react. And you react really late, which makes things actually worse. But then you improve things drastically. That tends to be human nature, and I think that might be what's going to happen in Bangalore, where, yeah, they've got enormous dumps on the streets. Obviously, they're transmission vectors for disease and pathogens and dogs going in, and very detrimental to people and the economy. It's estimated that the city's producing about 5,000 tonnes a day of waste, 1,500 tonnes of which is plastic, only 25% recycled. But actually, 25% recycling is as high as some of the very worst performers in the UK. But I just found out that a local businessman called Ahmed Khan has taken on this in the absence of concerted sort of municipal action. He's taken on the opportunity to create what he wants to call a society of eternal scarcity, waste scarcity. So he's looking to use the plastic and it is in fact using the plastic already to make roads. And he's gradually getting recognition from the municipal authorities that this might actually be an option. He reckons that they could lay 500 kilometres worth of new road each year by using the plastics that are coming out of the Bangalore waste stream. And he's gradually getting recognition from Bangalore, Calcutta and Delhi that this might be a good option. So let's wish him good luck, because I think you need sort of spirited individuals fighting the corner and business people and innovators to tackle this crisis. Because sometimes the governments and municipal authorities are just overwhelmed, under-resourced, under-financed. And once they have a lead, once they see an option that can cut their costs, then they might jump on it and match fund him or reinforce what he's trying to do. Good luck to Ahmed. It's not just abroad. This is the extraordinary scene in Essex in January in Purfleet. This fly-tipped line is a mile long, so it made the BBC News, and it gave some insight into the crisis in the UK, because there is a crisis in the UK. I'm sure if I'd been able to see out of the train windows tonight, I'd have seen all the waste piled up on the embankment. So you don't have to go far to see it. The Environment Agency expects to take action against 11 people or businesses on this crime, and clean-up cost is expected to be around about £100,000. It's estimated that the total cost of fly tipping in England last year was about £808 million. But interestingly, for every £1 spent on enforcement and prevention action, the economy recovers over £3. So if you spend, and unfortunately this is the direct opposite direction to what we're going, but if you spend £25,000 employing an enforcement officer to look into this, you'll get more than your money's back in waste prevention and prevention of crime and setting examples of prosecutions so that criminals feel less inclined to do this. At the moment, I think they've got almost a blank check because the regulatory structure is being challenged and the resources are being undermined. And of course, by reducing lighting in the first place, you then reduce your clean-up costs. You actually have more tax because all of this material should have been taxed under landfill tax if it had going to the waste stream, or alternative, if it had gone for recycling or reuse, it would have then contributed to a thriving economic sector, legitimate waste sector. Oh yeah. Well, last year there was in the UK. So last year there was 3,000 investigations into lighting last year. Just to give you an idea of the scale. So it's fairly simple, but the impacts are enormous. Why the waste crisis? So essentially, across the world as a whole, as you probably know, we have a rising population and we have rising incomes, and that means more waste, means more consumption of materials, means more stuff. It's what happens to that stuff that is the crucial thing. One of the points about the rising population actually is that there's a tendency for urban populations to produce a lot more waste than rural populations. And it's worth reflecting that by 2050 there'll be as many people in urban environments as there were on the entire planet in the year 2000. So that shows you the potential for growth. And also municipal solid waste. Municipal solid waste is basically a term which refers to waste that's, in this country anyway, waste that's collected by the council and a bit of additional commercial waste that the council might choose to collect. So it's basically the household waste. And that's expected to nearly double from 1.3 to just under 2.4 billion tonnes between 2010 and 2025. And as with Bangalore, and as with Lebanon, the effective waste management systems lag the growth. So there's a frenzy of consumption, and everyone starts drinking Coca-Cola and producing the plastic and getting electrical toys. And then a few years later, they realise there's a crisis, and the authorities wake up to that and then have to react in a panicked way. Being, as with the talk earlier, it's to do human decisions and human decision making, so it's always easier to deny the problem, especially when the problem is going to be expensive to tackle. It's going to require resources, investment, time, and public commitment. So we always want to put difficult, costly decisions. And there's conflict and political chaos. Waste management might not be the top priority in Ukraine, parts of eastern Ukraine at the moment, but these eventually have massive impacts on the environment. And a country in chaos is unlikely to have an effective waste management system being developed necessarily. I don't know. Ukraine's waste management might be perfect, as far as I know. There's the natural tendency for governments, relating back to the sort of neoliberal argument that we were talking, that was in the education debate. The neoliberal concerns trump the wider societal concerns, so we potentially have the rush for GDP growth ahead of anything else. And that's eminently clear from most of what, as you know, from most of what politicians say and do. The prospect of knocking 0.5% off GDP for any reason whatsoever is just almost unthinkable. So that always comes first, and we'll deal with all the side effects later. In a lot of the world, you have informal, possibly chaotic waste management systems that are swamped by the growth. So quite often very informal systems, which maybe were effective before the big boost in consumption and growth. Literally people taking materials from households or even or taking it off landfill sites themselves, which there are communities on landfill sites that do that, but as well as all the social issues involved in that, not able to recover adequate amounts of material once growth takes off. Yeah. So problems can appear slow motion with waste, a bit of waste on the ground here and there, builds up, and people start to turn a blind eye to it because it's a difficult thing to think about. And before you know it, you have a mountain like the one in Lebanon and real crisis scenarios developing for the environment. The other thing about waste is, and that applies to us, and you see it all the time in and around the streets of new mills as well. It's this idea that it's going to go somewhere else, it just magically vanishes, it's going to end up, the costs are externalised, the cost of me throwing the wrapper on the floor, well, they're not going to bother me, they're going to, if I knew about it, they might affect a fish in the Pacific 30 years later, so what's the problem with that? Costs are externalised, but as we know, gradually come back to haunt us over time. Another big issue in the UK actually is we have to work on really hard, and is actually a lot of people think that their recycling is not recycled, and think that it all goes into the same bin anyway, into the same landfill anyway, and that their efforts are pointless. So councils do spend a lot of time trying to convince the public and put the message out. And got a colleague who spent the last 6 months trying to trace where exactly all the materials from Derbyshire County Council waste collection teams actually end up in, and where they actually go, and actually to have an address. And we're going to do quite an extensive campaign called What Happens to Your Recycling? Because the research is that that's the single biggest parameter that might change behavioural attitudes on waste. Is that for a lot of people is to know what actually happens to the materials, because at the moment they don't know. So they need confidence and reassurance on that. So the impacts of the crisis, as I've talked about, are the adverse effects on human health. It can lead to flooding. Ironically, tonight there has been some flooding in the Bredbury, East Manchester area, maybe a mixture of blocked drains from waste and inclement climate change induced weather. It's around us all the time. So waste makes a 4% contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions, with landfills themselves and the degradation of organic matter making a 12% contribution to the methane emissions, which methane 21 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And the 4% contribution will come about partly because of the waste of resources, the need to use more natural resources once the original resource has been wasted. So it's the actual, for every ton of stuff made, several more tons are generally wasted. So if we can drive reuse and waste prevention, that makes an enormous impact. Recycling is great, but makes a lesser impact. We've got the loss of valuable land space, which is more of an issue in some countries than ours. And I think Japan has the highest incineration rate, but that would be possibly because of the tightness of land space, but it's also a big issue in this country with the soaring land price values. You have the unquantified but potentially massive effects on the ocean. There's been some good articles on that just recently. I think it's calculated that something like 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic in the sea, weighing about 260,000 tonnes at the moment, with the big gears of gyres of plastic in the central oceans of the Indian Ocean, the North and South Pacific. And I haven't quite worked out how this works, but apparently a researcher this year has found that in one part of the central Pacific you could actually get out and walk on this stuff, which you can only think is you create a thick enough mat on the ocean of stuff an entanglement, you do actually get enough resistance to walk on it like you would on ice, which is an alarming thought. And apparently some of the highest concentrations, you might be looking at 800 water bottles in the sea for every square kilometre. I was astonished and disturbed to learn actually that only in 2012 only 9% of US plastic was recycled, which is a shocking level in the United States. So there's obviously big issues there. What they're finding is that there's a massive imbalance between what they expected to find in the ocean in terms of plastic. It doesn't add up. The amount that we're producing is going up. The amount that's entering the sea has been going up dramatically, probably, but it hasn't appeared at the surface. So the things weren't adding up. They were wondering what was happening. But actually, what they now seem to be saying is that a lot of the breakdown of plastic in sunlight in the sea is quicker than they thought. And you're getting tiny fragments of plastic accumulating in the water column and then on the sediments of the ocean as well. So those materials are also being colonized by potentially pathogenic bacteria, which can then go into be taken up by the fish. And as those plastics then break down, you then have release of additives and toxic retardants, etc., into the fish. It's thought that if you regularly eat shellfish in Belgium now, you're exposed to 11,000 pieces of microplastics per year. We've also got these new products that are cleansing and cleansing products, which are a new one to me as well, which are containing these micro beads of plastic, which just go straight through the water system, the water treatment works, and out into the ocean. So one thing we can all do is make sure that our products don't contain those micro beads. In addition, waste results in pollution of ground, surface and drinking waters. That's why we now have very highly engineered landfill sites in the UK. And that's what's pushed the cost of landfill up dramatically. One of the things is that to even consider having a landfill now, the level of engineering is really, really almost prohibitively expensive, which is good news, I think. Of course, in much of the world, we're still on the system that we used to be on, which was the old dilute and pollute philosophy. There was literally a philosophy when it started in waste management that, if you dilute it enough, it'll be right, which is why we allowed ocean dumping and things like that. But just put it in a big enough estuary and don't worry about it. I think it's really important as well, something about it's essentially the theft of resources. Waste is basically the theft of resources from the future. And that's one thing that disturbs me actually about the whole environmental topic, is that people do think the future, but often they think it's hundreds of years, and I would argue, no, I tried to make the point that it's like 10, 15 years. It really is our lives that will be affected, not just children's lives, our lives. This is happening really rapidly. So we're stealing resources from ourselves by wasting them, which will eventually feed back into the economy. And we're starting with, since 2008, I know that was linked to banks and all sorts of issues there, but essentially you're starting to see a much more volatile commodities market. And of course, there's the moral case of a shameful legacy from all this waste. Just in terms of the commodities, you see that oil price trend. It's not necessarily adjusted for inflation, so it is a bit exaggerated, but you can see that the real ramp up of oil prices began in just after 2000, which is basically when demand started to hit supply levels. And since then, arguably that enormous spike there, well, it probably did impact on the global economy and contribute to the massive recession that then followed. And I remember after that recession, sort of in 2009, 10, the thought was that oil prices would stay at $30 a barrel for the next 5, 10 years. But actually, within a few months, they were shooting back up. And they then had a very, very protracted period along $100 a barrel, which has stimulated all sorts of exploration and the shale gas exploration. But the real interesting thing now is that because of all that, because of those very high prices and because of the extra supply, prices have now fallen. But just since the fall has been, as you know, 50% in the last 6 months, but the rig count for US oil rigs has already dropped by a third in response to that change. So the baseline price of oil production is probably somewhere up here at the $80 a barrel level. A lot of the current oil production will come off stream pretty quickly at the price that we have now. Recycling is a fantastic way of saving oil, and waste prevention is even better. So this just shows the overall waste projection with different scenarios. This is the baseline scenario. That's the scenario if we take decisive action on it, and that's like a worst case scenario for municipal waste growth. This is really interesting, and one of the things that really struck me during preparation of this talk, it always strikes me, but it's just how important we still are actually as consumers, and we are relatively disproportionately large wasters of material and users of stuff, and so we have a massive influence on the overall impact. So 44% of total waste is still coming from OECD countries, even though that's not by far the biggest. The Chinese population is in this bit here. This is Latin America. The whole of Middle East and North Africa is contributing just 6%. That's South Asia, including India. Those are huge populations, but a much smaller contribution to total waste.
David, pardon the ignorance, what's OECD? I'm terrible at acronyms.
Organisation of Economic Cooperation and Development, I think.
Right. Right. Of which we're a part. Right. Thank you.
Waste generation per capita. I mean, if you think of rich Western countries, Western Europe, United States, Canada, Australia, that's probably, just in case I'm wrong, the best way of thinking about it. Waste generation per capita, it's 4 times higher in Canada, the United States, the UK than in many African countries, so that's waste per head. You get a picture from that today urban India produces just a little more waste than urban Britain. Of course, the urban Indian population is about 300 million, where we are 50 million people, but we're still producing almost as much waste. Even by 2025, the US waste production will still be almost double that of India's, despite having a population 320 million as opposed to 1.4 billion. There is the massive growth of China, and that does mean that in total, China might produce twice as much waste as the US by 2025. But per person, it'll still only be a third. The cost of managing waste globally is looked at £375 billion. And actually, Oxfam say a much smaller figure than that would be enough to end extreme poverty the world over. And in many countries, for the municipal authorities, waste management is the biggest budget item. This is interesting as well. It shows the total global waste and what happens to it. So we've still got, by far the biggest proportion is going into landfill, or the uncontrolled landfill, the dumps. We've got a growing recycling rate. It is growing slowly. We've got also growing waste to energy, which is in previous years may have been called incineration, but it's definitely waste to energy in the UK now. So very highly controlled plants which deliver energy from heating up the waste. Composting, which we're always trying to promote and encourage. It's probably the single best thing we could do as individuals if we have the opportunity to compost in terms of waste. And a good deal of waste, which we don't really know what happens to it. This just shows how much of the waste that's produced by people is actually collected So we take it for granted that our waste, when we put it out, will be taken away, magically disappears, magically is used by, taken off a problem of ours and must be dealt with somewhere else, not a problem. It's obviously much lower collection rates in all the countries, so they get to see their problem in their actual neighbourhoods, whereas we might jettison it 15 or 20 miles down the road, where it causes problems for other communities. And this, again, on that theme, shows why our decisions matter so much in this country, because we are still, despite what we might think recently, a massively wealthy country and using huge amounts of materials. So you can see this is the higher income countries, which I suppose would be the United States, Europe, the upper middle, lower middle, and the lowest income countries. So even though the very lowest income countries are landfilling, dumping the vast majority of their waste, that is sort of a real problem in their communities, and it barely registers in a global sense. What really registers is the decisions that we make, because we're in this much bigger impact category. So, in summary terms, you have Western developed countries, we're recycling more of a heck of a lot. You have lowest income countries recycling very little of hardly anything, although some of the informal recycling is fantastic actually, and the use of materials is good. You have a huge number of countries that are racing towards our sort of lifestyles, but the waste management systems will take years to catch up, and they're possibly going to have some of the biggest impacts over the next 10, 15 years. And you might have some countries that manage to make a perfect transition from to a high income, high recycling economy. Taiwan, which I'll talk about soon, is possibly an example of that. That was all the bad news, but a heck of a lot of good news in terms of waste as well. Obviously, contrary to all the other issues, the waste management will bring improvement. Proper waste management then brings improvements to health, employment conditions, environmental protection, government revenues, morale, potentially. Massive economic market for recyclable waste globally. Preventing food waste could save the UK £12 billion a year, which I think is about 1 month's borrowing. So that would help. What could we do? In terms of what you were saying earlier, what could we do with £12 billion? Yeah. And it would save $750 billion globally annually. So already in the US, you have 1.1 million people employed in reuse and recycling, and they are tending to earn higher than average wages because they're recycling as resources become scarce, offers potentially lucrative rewards in terms of recovering the materials. There's basic facts like this that we would talk to the children about in the public, and just recycling one aluminium can will save enough energy to run a television for 3 years. Home composting saves Derbyshire taxpayers about £250,000 a year, and recycling is saving Derbyshire about £8 million a year, which is at a time where every penny is utterly crucial. 8 million might help keep some bus lanes open or some swimming baths, libraries open. Some good case studies I came across looking at this talk. So this was in Pune, India, which was basically a highly informal system. Prior to sort of 2008, really. So there was a very informal system where people from the lowest caste would actually go around to houses and collect what they could for recycling, but it was chaotic, dangerous activity, and often, perhaps because of social attitudes, some of the most valuable materials were actually taken by housemaids, middlemen, the middle classes to use for their needs. And during that period before the improvement, the people, women, it was primarily women who did this, and they would travel up to 12 kilometres a day and have head loads of up to 40 kilograms with average earnings of $1.12 a day. In addition to that, you'd have informal hazardous waste and hazardous sorting of waste on the landfill sites. And you'd have issues with people being crushed by waste avalanches, vehicles on landfill sites, etc. In 1993, as early as that, the people who were doing this attended a conference with a local university, and because of their concerted efforts, and I presume it started with just a few really determined individuals, as these things often do, they began to get some recognition from the local government. And in 2008, quite a long process later, they managed to form a cooperative, which is still sort of gradually formalising today, and it's the Cooperative for Solid Waste Collection and Handling Services. And they've got more and more recognition from the municipal authorities who've given them uniforms, and as with the Bangalore, they've seen that this is really good news because it's reducing their municipal waste fee, so they're managing to withdraw more and more containers, which means they don't have to send vehicles around, resources around to collect it. So they're suddenly seeing that this is an opportunity. And the fact that the group of people has gained uniforms and formed this cooperative has changed public attitudes towards them. So there's more of a willingness to give them the higher qualities of materials. There's also local composting, community composting projects, very local, sort of within villages and within the actual properties themselves. And there's been an incentive given for people to actually have a rent rebate for householders to actually have the composting on their site. And because the composting takes place so locally, people are seeing that contamination is a problem, so they're improving their approach to it. And the upshot is that there's more recycling, there's less cost for the municipal authorities, and the people in the cooperative have seen their incomes triple. So that is excellent news, which I presume started just probably through the determination of a few individuals to change things, maybe some NGO intervention. Alaminos, Philippines, I mean, this is staggering to me because zero waste is like a dream to us, but they're sort of getting on with it, and we've just talked about it in this country for a long time, where I think basically this was a tourist area where there was a lot of fly tipping. It was affecting the marine environment where people used to come and dive and things. And basically the government, so they had a lot of fly tipping, burning, proliferation of non-recyclables, and there was plans were developed for developing a lot of incinerators. They ran into opposition and gradually became to a more sustainable waste management solution of sort of local composting. And they had workshops to engage with the community to see what they wanted and to really make it work. And it was a mixture of NGO intervention and also the impact eventually match funding from the local authorities, which got on top of this. They had a project, they rolled out the bins, they got the resorts involved, householders involved, businesses involved. They even consulted the informal junk shops who use the materials to sell aeroplanes made from cans and things like that, and they got everyone involved. And the follow-up found that 50% of the population were aware of the project, and 21 out of the 39 village leaders attended zero waste workshops, which if we had a result like that would be amazed. So that was brilliant, and seen massive reductions in fly tipping. And actually in 2003, the Republic Act required the implementation of solid waste management plans across that area, across the Philippines, and they've now got a zero waste strategy developing, which again is amazing. Taiwan is another example where basically in the late 1980s there was a recognition that basically we were running out of space, and the government solution at that stage was to have a massive program of incineration development, and that actually led to quite a lot of fierce community opposition. But now, in response to that opposition, the government did sit down and take concerted action and went for a zero waste policy, and has implemented a lot of things which we would think of as quite radical, things that I would love to see, but they actually got on and did it in terms of requiring producers of electrical goods to take back materials, adopting a pay-as-you-throw system. So basically, the more that householders throw out, the more that they pay. Reuse and take-back schemes for bottles and other items, banning disposable ranges of disposable items in schools. So they've managed to achieve massive GDP growth without the waste growth, and 13% fall in waste per person, just through that concerted action. That showed sort of the importance of government intervention. So what can I do? What can we do? It's remarkably, one part of it is remarkably simple, which is what we can do in our lives, because when I think about it, I'm amazed that the recycling rate in Derbyshire is still under 50%, because, just by taking pretty simple action, should be far lower than that. So maybe the bigger challenge for the people in this room is to think about how we can influence more people out there, really. But I think for all of us, thinking about it, if we don't think about it, we'll just carry on regardless and adopt our same old habits. You might think about it and you might still not do anything about it, but at least if you've thought, there's a slightly better chance. Could he recover that into the chain of commercial utility, make it useful again, the wires on his head or whatever they are? And just pointing out that in the future projection of this, in which way we go, is going to rely on the trillions of decisions of individuals. We're all making decisions every day which influence this outcome, and multiply that up globally, and you get the global solution or outcome will be those decisions. So yeah, if you can occasionally tactically nudge people, influence wider circles, that can be a good thing to do. You might accidentally leave an interesting article about waste in the dentist or something like that. Or you might just point out to someone occasionally about, you put that in there, did you know you could recycle it? And, did you know I saved £20 last month by not wasting that sort of food waste stream? And that's the sort of tactics we use in Derbyshire to try and make it real to the individual, and point out that there's financial things, financial benefits in particular. That's a good one. Just remembering that, there's people in my office who must be fully aware of what we do, but still do not recycle, and I still see plastic bottles in the wrong container and paper going into the wrong container. And, these people sat across the room from me. So you cannot underestimate the power of inertia, even of the educated people who know everything about it. And it's how you nudge people to make that tiny bit of extra effort, which can have dramatic answers on a postcard. For us, in the northwest England, where we are, very basic things can help dramatically reduce waste on the amount of waste we all produce personally. I talked about composting. A third of what's in the bin can be composted if you have a space or a garden. And even if you have we have a tiny garden, but still manage to compost, because you don't necessarily need to use what's in the bin in any significant way. It just looks after itself, and you can keep on putting the vegetables in. Once the weather warms up, it's quite remarkable how fast the process is, and that's converting the waste to water and carbon dioxide rather than the methane it would have become if it had gone into anaerobic landfill. Love food, hate waste. Good example tonight. Let's try and use all the food here tonight. Take it back for eating. Yeah. Food has a tremendous effect because of all the energy that goes into creating it, the wider environmental effect, but food will release methane if it breaks down in landfill. You can avoid it, and you can avoid the cost of its collection by eating it. Most of us will have a furniture reuse charity shop project nearby. Use it if you can. They will accept sort of working items, sometimes larger electrical items, sofas that have a valid fire certificate. There's e-recycling, things like EcoModo, where you have the services in the local community that are available. You can pass things on through Recycle Free. People will quite often happily come and collect things that was a problem to you, but they actually want, saving the inconvenience. We have a whole campaign in Derbyshire called Pass It On, which is just encouraging that thing of passing the old mobile phone on if you can. And not popular or fashionable thing to do, but passing on electricals, toys can maybe used for the younger sibling or their friends, and clothes be handed down, simple things like that. Well, one of the things that we have to try and do is engage with young kids, and we have a Waste Watchers theatre performance, which is like a theatric performance that goes out to all Year 8 pupils in Derbyshire, and a lot of comedy and engagement through that. But there's a lot of other good things that are going to help this cause, which is the recognition by business, not necessarily through altruism, but certainly the bottom line that they need to take action. And a lot of businesses are taking dramatic action to reduce their waste. And there's things like the Courtauld agreement, where there's a this is a voluntary agreement by retailers to reduce their packaging, thin it, strengthen it. Bit of a grey area in some packaging, in that by having the packaging you preserve the food. And actually, for like a punnet of tomatoes, if you threw the packaging away, the effect of that is something like 1/5 of the effect of if you actually threw the tomato away in carbon terms. So sometimes tiny bit of packaging is serving a bigger purpose. There's some grey area there. Thank goodness for the EU, there's dramatic legislation coming through from the EU, and has been over the last decade or so, to drive up environmental standards, increase recycling of cars, increase reuse and recycling of electrical items, protect groundwater. So we were not going to really adopt until we were forced the groundwater protection initiative that came from Europe. So voluntary. Yeah, you have the pressure of the consumer and the stock market to gain accreditation and environmental management systems. I don't think there's enough of that necessarily, of us as consumers sort of demanding change and, occasionally leaving the packaging at the supermarket till and engaging with the supermarket manager about this, because gradually that sort of public pressure does change things over years. Perhaps there could be more of that, I think. But once, of course, companies set fantastic examples, and the examples are there in terms of what they've saved financially, others follow. It's the financial bit that matters. If they see the bottom line changing, they're going to go for it. So that in the UK, Waste Arisings in 2004, this is across commercial, industrial and household, were 526 million. But by 2010, down to 177 million, still an enormous amount, but actually an absolutely enormous fall in waste in the UK. So that is the overall conclusion from my talk, that we are really, these next 4 or 5 years remain critical, sort of getting onto the right side of the road, but massive action is required by individuals, communities, businesses, corporations and governments to salvage the situation and save the environment and the oceans. And that will be me. Thank you.
Excellent.
I didn't see anyone walk through that.
Any questions at all?
Yeah. Could you say something more about this zero waste policy? I mean, what does that mean? Not getting
It means, no, in reality, in practical reality, it means dramatically increasing the efforts that you make to prevent waste. I don't think you're actually going to end up with completely zero waste. That's virtually impossible. But it's more like an idea that means, if it was adopted in Derbyshire, it could be adopted. It would mean, dramatically looking at the way that we procure things and make use of the materials and full commitment. But it seems like that in the Philippines, they're managing to drive it forward as a sort of emblematic objective in the long term. I don't think in practical, realistic terms you can ever necessarily get to zero waste. Yeah.
The basic question is a friend of mine burns his household waste in the back, in a thing.
Oh yeah.
Is that bad? I mean, he says, "Oh no, I know what to burn and what not to burn, and it's all fine." Is that fine?
That's not as burning, I suppose.
Is it possible that there are things that are okay to burn? I think it was like a backpack and some pieces of wood.
I suppose that's going back 40, 50 years. That's what we used to do. We used to burn a lot more. And it never feels like a problem now because the only reason it doesn't feel like a problem is because no one else is doing it. If another 5 people from his street suddenly started to do it, then it would quite quickly become a problem. So, we have wood burning stoves, so I suppose we have small amounts of paper going onto that to get that started. I don't know about might not be as good as recycling that. I suspect the best thing to do would be to recycle more of those materials and burn less of it if you possibly could. Yeah.
How do other countries approach these problems? I mean, other smarter countries than the UK, countries like Sweden, Scandinavian countries, Holland, how do they deal with this problem?
The best recycling area is Flanders in Belgium, where I think they're up at 75% recycling. I think the rest of it is energy from waste, so really dramatic. And basically, it's concerted, determined, financed, properly resourced government action with resources on the ground. As part of this, the talk for looking at this, I was amazed actually. One of the other perfect examples is San Francisco, where they again have really gone for public engagement in a big way. And I noticed that the population there was 800,000, which is about the same as Derbyshire, and they have 11 zero waste officers working on their campaign, where we have 2. So it's like being brave enough to make the upfront investment in equipment, public engagement, infrastructure, which rich countries should be able to do because they'll then benefit. And actually, the Scottish and Welsh governments are much more proactive on this. We're, as you probably know from the previous talk, we're in the laissez-faire era at the moment where the government for England is, in terms of English policy, is very hands-off and actually has sort of withdrawn some of the targets that were driving improvement. And it's basically left to councils with a lot less money to try and do what they can. That's probably quite a harsh critique of what they're doing, but you could see it that way.
When I was in Finland, one of the best things I saw was when you bought like a bottle of Coke, it was £1 more expensive than it should have been. And then if you brought the bottle back, you got £1 back. And there were people on the streets with shopping trolleys full of bottles, which they were taking back because people were too lazy and just threw them on the floor. why doesn't those sort of schemes exist more? Because that just seems perfect, doesn't it? Who the hell is going to bin a bottle and then if you get a pound for it? But if you do, then someone else is going to pick it up and bring it back and get the pound, and then ensure that is recycled.
There's
Is there a reason why we don't do that? I'm saying you don't.
The reason is that there was a big, it was about 7 or 8 years ago actually, where there was retailers looked at it and all decided it wasn't economically viable, and they weren't going to support it. And at that point, I think the government backed off driving it, really. And it just never happened. It's this sort of inertia thing, unless you have someone who takes an idea like that, puts resources behind it, and really believes in it, and you need the economics to stack up, and possibly more willingness from the corporate sector to take on board some of the costs. I mean, one of the issues we have in this country, perhaps, is that the producer responsibility element is not quite strong enough yet. The people who manufacture electrical goods and products are still, there's not enough cost to them. The cost is still dealt with by us and the environment. So it may well come back into favour. Of course, in the 2008 slump, the market for recyclables went through the floor, things like that. So they would argue that they might be left with a load of thousands of bottles that they don't know what to do with. But in terms of their overall profits, it would be negligible anyway. Probably. There's, again, lack of general will and someone pushing. Yeah.
I agree with you. I think it sounds like a great idea. I mean,
It
just kind of seems
because grew up with the deposit on a bottle, this is But if we start from the point of view that everything must be decided on the basis that capital must make a profit, then you come to the conclusion this isn't worthwhile. But it's only if you start from that point of view. It's only if you start from the point of view that the system must run in order to shift public money into private profit.
Yeah, exactly.
But all this makes economic sense. Makes no economic sense if you don't start from that point of view.
And the costs are because the costs don't appear on our balance sheet, local balance sheet, it's externalised. So it is getting that sort of. I mean, an example of that would be electricals, where under the producer responsibility, a lot of retailers, rather than offering to take back electricals and deal with them themselves, they're sort of giving councils a bit of money to go off and do recycling projects, which will make some difference. And I'm trying to win some money at the moment to get one going, but it wouldn't be as easy as if, like, all big electricals said, once you finish with them, bring it back here, we'll deal with it. The bulk of the costs and the complexities of it.
I'm interested. I like what you said about we're stealing from ourselves. We're stealing from the future. And I'm fascinated with one of the concepts we find in economics, which is opportunity costs. So I go into a shop, I've got £1. Now I can spend it on these fruit pastels. But if I buy the fruit pastels, I can't get the fruit juice.
Which is it's a good one, because the hand is being forced, I suppose, in some senses, of councils, for example, who they need security, and they need to know that there's going to be an outlet for waste in 20 years' time, and they need to make strategic decisions about what we are going to do for waste for the next 20 years, which means there may be a tendency to enter into long-term contracts, perhaps for energy for waste, which may or may not be the right thing to do, but are enormously expensive to plan, deliver, operate. What could that money have been used for in terms of zero waste? But from our point of view, we need to have an outlet for the waste. We can't be left in a situation where there is no outlet left because all the landfills are closed. And so it's that balance of having to have the security of a waste outlet, but recognising that that's going to cost in terms of the other opportunities that you might have missed, like giving everyone a free compost bin.
Well, loved what you said about the one aluminium can can drive a television for 3 years.
3 hours.
Oh, sorry, 3 hours.
Oh,
I thought.
said 3 years as well. I
Yeah.
was like,
3 years. No, that would be good. 3 hours.
But it made me think about
One glass bottle and Nintendo Wii for 5 hours.
one glass bottles,
Yeah.
Nintendo, right?
Those sort of things. It appeal more to kids.
If you just refill the glass bottle, it'd be 10 hours. Well, that's what always frustrates me about putting a glass bottle in the recycling. Is I could take this back to Aldi and you could just fill it back up for me, but I don't think they do that. Because it frustrates me that the van that took the glass bottle there is going back to the depot at some point. Eventually, why can't I bring the bottle back and you take it back to the factory that's filling the bottle? Yeah. Is anyone, do you think we'll ever get to a point where that, because it used to happen, didn't it, with milk on the doorstep? You put the bottle back out.
Yeah.
Does it? Right. I was going to say all those bottles of German beer that you buy in the supermarket.
I think in this country we are very keen on. Well, we've been made to be keen on having all the space in our supermarkets used by thousands of different beautifully coloured products, and all of this space is utterly crucial to the retailer in their utter war for market share, and putting in some bigger containers where people can refill. Well, that might be 20, 30 different products they could have displayed. It's that sort of tension, not necessarily having the sort of forward thinking that you've got there. We can only, keep asking. I mean, that's consumer pressure, writing to the manager of that Aldi or whatever, or talking to them when you go in, making a headache.
You
out
should
of
see
it.
the face of Bob. When I'm in a certain mood, I might well say that.
I suppose if they had 20 people a day saying it instead of one person every week, then they would start to think about it. It's the inertia.
I'd like. Sorry to.
I've just got one idea, and it's something. It's kind of like my pet notion, which I never hear anyone talk about, and that is with food. All these 2-for-1 offers that exist, I can't help but think that drives a waste in food because people buy things, and they're pushed towards buying more of something than they would naturally buy. So, say if you're buying half a kilo of strawberries and it's 2-for-1, but you actually only want a small number of strawberries. So you go down that tap, or you might go down that tap, and so for me, there is a wastage in that whole concept of how offers are done. I know this will be deeply unpopular, but for example, Aldi, you go into Aldi and they don't have those kind of offers. But you go into some of the other places, like Tesco, and they've got a huge number of these offers. Personally, I'd be very interested in having legislation to stop people actually creating these offers, which must be forcing wastage. Are you aware of anyone that's ever suggested that? I mean, I'm just thinking.
I think there is discussion going on about exactly that at the moment. Banning these 2-for-1 deals because of the negative effects of causing the extent of waste.
I know certainly in the alcohol business, and certainly in Scotland, they have been banned. So anything that, and obviously that's more to do with public health and encouraging people to buy more. But if you can do it in the alcohol arena, why can't you do it in any other food waste?
I mean, it means the trick. You can see why there's going to be. I mean, the retailers are not going to jump up and down about that.
Suggesting affect their bottom line. Not necessarily the first thing this government will think of doing. But we talk to people regularly, all the time about helping to equip them to reduce their food waste, because actually some people haven't thought about it and do want to learn about how to store things, and very simple things like writing a shopping list before you go to the shop and storing things at the right temperature, reusing leftovers. We mainly put that on the platform of cost saving and saving money, which guys do light up when they realise they might be saving £60 a month on it. So we're trying to fight a bit of a guerrilla war with the actual public themselves to change their attitude, which might face eventually to the supermarkets as well. And the supermarkets would say they're doing quite a lot about packaging as well in terms of lightweighting and strengthening. I think Sainsbury's was committed to looking at every single product stream and trying to get the best packaging solution for that in carbon and waste terms. It's a massive project. They are committed to that.
Just a quick. You mentioned the idea of leaving the packaging at the till. Have you come across communities, people doing this?
No,
because now I want to go. Yeah, not to my locals.
Someday I'm going to go and see what happens.
I've come across a few radical nutters who've done something.
I might go across the other side of town and be a radical nutter.
Again, if you could get a momentum, or we'd be interested to see what the outcome of that would. It would certainly make a big media story, probably. Enough people did it, and that would potentially galvanise action or open up the discussion about it. Yeah.
You say about Sainsbury's. I fell out with them recently because they were doing milk in plastic bags, which you bought a Jugget thing for. And then they stopped doing it. So all they've done then is sold a load of plastic things, like, actual physical plastic jugs that no one's going to use anymore. And they claim it's because they've got a better way of saving plastic, but it's rubbish. Me and a couple of people tweeted them and tweeted nothing back. So it just feels like, well, I get annoyed because Marks and Spencer's do the same. They wax lyrical about how wonderful they are about saving the planet, but then they put everything in a really thick plastic bag for you at the till. I mean, they charge you 5p, but I mean, that's you're still wasting all that stuff. It does feel a little bit like they like to say how good they are about saving plastic, but I never feel very convinced.
But you probably will take back the reusable bag yourself.
Well, I would, yeah.
So, I mean, I think, tackling it's not really within our direct remit to tackle the supermarkets. So, but you can tremendously minimise your own waste production by always remembering the reusable bag and avoiding packaging where you can, eating all the food that you buy, making sure you recycle what you can recycle, passing things on, using furniture projects. Just by doing all those things, if everyone in the UK did all those things, the recycling rate wouldn't be 47, it'd be up near 80. So it is, there's the frustrations of what's happening in the corporate world, but we shouldn't forget that. Tremendous amount we can all do, but most people in this room probably already are doing those things. The challenge for people in this room is how you influence the people in the pub out there. That's the real challenge, and that's what we grapple with. Because in the Chesterfield and Bolsover areas, there's a food waste collection service. People can, just by putting materials into the right bin, recycle their food, but they don't. So we need to look at why they're not doing that. And it might be that they need a caddy or a bag. Something is not right. To them, the issue of putting food into a bin that's collected once every fortnight is too big a deal. So they are more interested in the direct, immediate hygiene issue in their bin than they are on the wider implications. And they're more worried about, it doesn't feel very squeamish, this, I don't really like this. That is a bigger issue to them. And it's those sort of people we need to influence and try and persuade to change.
David, it would be. You said you were doing you were trying to find out, or you have found out, what happens to all of this waste.
Oh yeah.
That goes to recycling, and then everybody thinks, oh, I'm not quite sure what happens to it, so maybe I won't, because I don't think that's going to be recycled or that's going to be recycled.
Yeah.
I've seen an opportunity for the Ragged website.
Oh,
we might take the work that you're doing, put it on the website, and get it out there so that people do have a real sense of what's happening to all of that stuff. Because the amount of times I hear people saying, oh, that doesn't get recycled anyway, and I think, it might get recycled.
It does get recycled. We'll probably have to accept that it's an international world, and some of the recycling takes place in China, but that is where so much of our stuff is coming from. The boats have to go back there anyway to collect more products. They may as well go back with the stuff that they need to make the new products. And the Environment Agency, the RAP reports, government reports have shown that even sending those materials to China for recycling is environmentally more beneficial than putting it in a UK landfill, even doing that. Whereas, of course, the whole industry is trying to generate more markets here so that we can recycle these materials as close to the UK as possible. So there's like a new juice carton recycling plant in Huddersfield in Yorkshire now. So gradually things are improving in that respect.
I was just thinking about how our local council, they pick up the aluminum and plastic and paper, but not glass. So we take the glass to the special recycling ourselves. Do you think there'd be any hope to write to the council and say, hey, why don't you pick up glass as well? Is that a thing across the councils?
Yeah, no, that councils will look at that, and they do listen to what the residents say.
Okay.
They do, really do take it very seriously. But it depends what their financial circumstance is at the moment and what level of financial crisis they will probably be in a financial crisis just at the moment. But that might not last forever. And then councils, whenever they can, they will try to add new materials. They're trying to boost juice carton recycling in parts of Derbyshire at the moment, and they're just waiting for the financial opportunity. But at the moment, it's just cut.
And the dividends for Derbyshire County Council, if I heard you correctly, were 8 million.
That's the saying. But if all that recycling disappeared and went to landfill, it would cost at least £8 million. And it's a crucial thing for us. It really is. If waste goes down 1% because people reuse their bags or send a fridge to a furniture project for reuse, that can save up to £1 million a year when it's multiplied up. Every pound is absolutely vital in the public sector, as you know.
Can I reference that in my letter? David Brown.
February
19th, 2015. Personal contact.
Yeah, phone call probably.
Any more questions? I'm sure everybody will agree that was a highly informative and very entertaining talk. So thank you, David, for imparting all of that information to us. And hopefully we'll put some of it onto our site. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you to all of you who came along. And if anybody wants to do a talk, contact me. I'd be delighted to hear from you. And we look forward to seeing you on the next meeting, which is definitely one on June the 11th and maybe one before.
Yes, can I just add on just a thought? Mentioned the idea of producer as student. It would be lovely to see or hear from all of you as you go away and take what the ideas, the thoughts that you've been introduced to by the two Davids, and what will you reshape those into? And it would be fantastic if you'd consider publishing them through the Ragged website. Again, let's enrich the public domain and be producers of knowledge. And
any ideas on how we get people to use the recycling they already have? Much appreciated. Behavioural change. That's a big area.
And thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed.